So last but by no means least, we're going to talk about The Tempest, a beautiful and haunting and quite contentious play right the way through to our times. It was intended to be Shakespeare's final play, but of course he ended up writing Henry VIII as his final play. He was getting older, he wasn't very well, he's ruminating on a lot of things in his life, and there's also some elements of his life and times and the culture in which he lives, specifically the colonialist attitudes that were starting to form at the time, that are very striking to a modern audience. So The Tempest is a play in 5 acts. It was written in 1611 and it was published in the first folio of 1623, and that version comes from papers that Shakespeare had left himself, annotated, in which he talked about the production of the play, and it was edited by Ralph Crane, who was the scrivener for The King's Men, Shakespeare's theatre troupe. Someone had to write down the scripts for the actors. And so the version of it that we have is quite reliable. Here's a little synopsis of the story of The Tempest. The play opens with a storm created by the magician Prospero. Prospero, to prosper, prosperity, it's that kind of idea. He and his daughter Miranda have been exiled to an island, and Miranda in Latin means to be wondered at, a marvel, a miracle. And since Prospero's into magic, it makes sense that he would have called his daughter this. Prospero had been the Duke of Milan, but he was usurped by his brother Antonio, and he and Miranda were set adrift on a boat when Miranda was only 3. And this took place largely because Prospero was more interested in books and in magic than in running the kingdom and governing. When he arrives on the island, he uses his magic to free the sprite Ariel. Now, Ariel, who's a non-human entity, has been trapped by the sorceress Sycorax because he wouldn't do her bidding. He wouldn't take part in her schemes. The only other human on the island is Caliban, who is Sycorax's son. And Miranda and Prospero take Caliban in, and he lives with them, and all is well until Caliban tries to rape Miranda. At that point, he is enslaved by Prospero, who traps him in a rock, and he's forced to do menial things for Miranda and Prospero, such as fetching the firewood. The Tempest raised by Prospero is intended to trap a party of Neapolitans who are returning to Naples from a wedding in Tunis, and this party includes some people who are pretty significant to Prospero, including his treacherous brother Antonio, but also King Alonso of Naples and his sons Ferdinand and Sebastian. And Prospero sees in these young princes a nice match for Miranda, who's been so isolated for all of her young life. Ariel brings them ashore, but Ferdinand becomes separated from the party and he is presumed drowned by the rest of the party. Caliban plots against Prospero once he has some co-conspirators, especially Stefano, and Antonio plots against Alonso, but Ariel foils their plans. Alonso believes that Ferdinand's presumed death is a punishment, and so he has a change of heart. So again, we're seeing themes of repentance. Prospero comes to believe that Antonio and his company are repentant, and so prepares to leave exile on the island and return to Milan to claim his rightful throne. Meanwhile, Ferdinand, still very much alive, has met and fallen in love with Miranda, and she reciprocates. She believes that this is disobeying her father, but actually it's exactly what her father wants. Prospero watches them and wants them to remain chaste, no sex before marriage, but encourages the match as it makes Miranda happy, and it might actually be a way of reconciling Milan and Naples. It'll be a good political marriage. Let's talk about the themes of The Tempest. Justice is a key theme of The Tempest. Prospero's dethroning and exile are unjust, as is the fact that poor Miranda is trapped on the island with him and is brought up in this total isolation away from other humans. Prospero tends to be the person who doles out justice on the island when he frees Ariel and when he imprisons Caliban. So according to SparkNotes, the play offers no notion of higher order or justice to supersede Prospero's interpretation of events. The play is morally ambiguous. As the play progresses, however, it becomes more and more involved with the idea of creativity and art, and Prospero's role begins to mirror more explicitly the role of an author creating a story around him. With this metaphor in mind, and especially if we accept Prospero as a surrogate for Shakespeare himself, Prospero's sense of justice begins to seem, if not perfect, at least sympathetic. And that's quite a long running view of the play. People have felt that about it for centuries. Some modern critics don't see it like that. We're going to hear a little bit about that later. The happy ending does create a sense of justice, though. All is going to be restored. Prospero back in his rightful place. Miranda's finally found other human beings. For certain characters, all is well. Prospero forgives his enemies, frees his slaves, gives up his magic, which he had basically used to control people around him and to control events, and he becomes more or less an old man, albeit a royal old man. Now, the human and the monstrous is a huge theme of The Tempest. Miranda refers to Ferdinand as the third man ere I saw, the first two being her father and Caliban, although she and Prospero actually treat Caliban as if he's almost subhuman. Miranda reminds Caliban that she taught him to speak, and that before that he gabbled like a thing most brutish. Prospero claims to have given Caliban human care, which almost suggests that he's not quite human. Learning of Caliban's plot with Stefano, Prospero refers to him as a devil, a born devil, on whose nurture can never stick. So you're born a devil, you're evil, and nothing that I can do to raise you and to change you is going to work because that's your innate nature. That's what that's saying there. And Miranda also expresses this view that basically, although Caliban is now superior to what he was before they arrived, he can never fully be human. She describes thy vile race, though thou didst learn, had that which good natures could not abide to be with. So she's saying the same thing as her father. Your race and your nature make you evil, and it can't be changed. Prospero's anger with Caliban and the way they treat him is of course based on the notion that he tried to rape Miranda, but the audience is actually left to wonder whether Caliban actually is innately brutish, or his treatment by Prospero and Miranda, who are basically colonizers, has caused him to turn out like this. Caliban is actually capable of both eloquent speeches and drunken servile behaviour, as SparkNotes puts it. And so it's really hard to interpret which way to view this character. I personally don't think he is a sort of bestial subhuman character. He's playing a role, in my mind, in fulfilling the expectations that are put upon him by Prospero, who is incredibly powerful because of his magic and because of the fact that he's used that to become ruler of the island. Colonialism, we've hinted at, a much discussed topic in The Tempest. Caliban, who has been alone on the island before the arrival of Prospero and Miranda, laments that he used to be his own king before they turned up. He had much more freedom. The empty island affords Prospero a place to raise and educate his daughter and practice his magic, as it had also been a place for Sycorax to work her magic, so it's been exploited by residents for some time. Gonzalo, when he tries to comfort Alonso, the King of Naples, uses the idea that he could rule over a society, a kind of utopian society on the island. So he is of a ruling race, and wherever he ends up, he's going to be ruling the place. Caliban suggests to Stefano that he should kill Prospero, and Stefano replies, "Monster, I will kill this man. His daughter and I will be king and queen. Save our graces, and Trinculo and thyself shall be my viceroys." So wanting to set up this very European hierarchical, monarchical society on this island. And Caliban, of course, is basically just going to replace one colonizer with another. He wants to get rid of Prospero, but replace him with Stefano. A little quote from SparkNotes. Stefano particularly looks forward to taking advantage of the spirits that make noises on the isle. They will provide music for his kingdom for free. All these characters envision the island as a space of freedom and unrealised potential. The tone of the play, however, towards the hopes of the would-be colonisers is vexed at best. Gonzalo's utopian vision in Act 2, Scene 1, is undercut by a sharp retort from the usually foolish Sebastian and Antonio. When Gonzalo says that there would be no commerce or work or sovereignty in his society, Sebastian replies, "Yet he would be king on't." And Antonio adds, "The latter end of his commonwealth forgets the beginning." Gonzalo's fantasy thus involves him ruling the island while seeming not to rule it, and in this he becomes a kind of parody of Prospero. So I think we need to recall here that during the reign of Elizabeth I, we have explorers like Sir Francis Drake going off to the New World, finding parcels of land they can exploit. And also we have the beginnings of the East India Company. It was actually Elizabeth I who gave royal warrant to the East India Company, which would become the key component in British colonialism, spreading through the East Indies and at one point a third of the world. And those attitudes haven't fully developed in history yet, but they were beginning in Shakespeare's times. And we can see them in The Tempest in how the characters view both the island itself, the land, and Caliban, the resident thereof. Caliban, who is basically a slave, is the play's sole representative of the colonised rather than the coloniser. And he's described as brutish, he's less than human, he has to be educated, he has to be taught to speak. Some very colonialist attitudes there. Even though he plots to kill his coloniser, as we've mentioned before, he would replace Prospero with Stefano and basically stay in the same situation but under another ruler. Prospero actually shows real cruelty towards Caliban, saying, "If now thou neglectst or dost unwillingly what I command, I'll rack thee with old cramps, fill all thy bones with aches, make thee roar." So if you don't do what I want, I'm going to physically hurt you. Not a pleasant attitude, although he feels that Caliban is a threat to his daughter, and so we could justify that in a way. You can read and or watch The Tempest and see what you think. There is a hierarchy on the island, and that's similar to that of the emerging European colonial powers of the era of the play's composition. Prospero, as a former duke and possessor of magic, he's got a power that puts him in charge, is at the apex in the kind of hierarchy of the island, and he expects obedience from all around him, including Miranda. She believes her romance with Ferdinand is an act of rebellion against him, is disobedience to him, but it's actually in line with what he wants for her anyway. Ariel has been a faithful servant to Prospero, but when he asks for his freedom, Prospero is pretty displeased. Miranda, whose name means to be wondered at, as we mentioned before, miracle, that kind of idea, she basically personifies optimism, and she joyfully looks towards a brave new world. And that phrase, brave new world, is one of the most famous phrases from The Tempest and came to be associated both with the play but also with the idea of frontiers and expansionism. Treason and assassination plots is another theme of The Tempest. Very early in his reign, in 1605, only a few years before The Tempest was written, in 1611, James VI of Scotland and First of England, who had succeeded to the throne after Elizabeth I, faced the famous gunpowder plot. You know, Guy Fawkes, remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot, when a group of Catholic conspirators, perturbed at the kind of harshness and injustice that they were facing under a Protestant king, plotted to blow up Parliament, and they hired some space under Parliament and filled it with gunpowder, but the plot was foiled and the king's life and the Houses of Parliament were saved. So that idea of treason was very much in the public consciousness at the time. James VI and First was also absolutely obsessed with witchcraft. He himself interrogated witches and he was very involved in the Pendle witch trials. He wrote a book called Demonology. So this magic in The Tempest and the idea of Caliban being a devil, a sorceress's son, that's kind of playing into some preoccupations of the king's. So The Tempest contains the treason against Prospero by Antonio and 2 assassination plots put forward by Caliban against Prospero and Alonso against Antonio. Miranda and Ferdinand play chess at the end, and of course the whole point of chess is to remove the king. So that's another little suggestion. Ooh, will we have more treason in the future? There is repentance, though, and a turning away from these plots, and ultimately there is forgiveness, and that allows us to have a happy ending.
A little look at Act 1, Scene 2, and we're given a bit of a synopsis of it here. Prospero, the former Duke of Milan, who has been stranded on a barren island for 12 years with his daughter Miranda, explains to her that he has used his magic to raise the storm and that he ensured that no one on the ship was harmed. He then tells her how 12 years before his brother Antonio conspired with Alonso, King of Naples, to usurp Prospero's dukedom and put him and Miranda to sea, where they happened upon the barren island that is now their home. Having charmed Miranda asleep, Prospero summons the spirit Ariel, hears Ariel's report of the Tempest, and gives him further orders. Prospero wakes Miranda and they visit Caliban, whom Prospero threatens with torture if he will not continue his labours. Ariel, invisible, entices Ferdinand, son and heir to Alonso, into the presence of Prospero and Miranda. Prospero, delighted that Ferdinand and Miranda fall instantly in love, puts false obstacles in their way by accusing Ferdinand of treason and by using charms to enslave him. So enter Prospero and Miranda says, "If by your art, my dearest father, you have put the wild waters in this roar, allay them. The sky, it seems, would pour down stinking pitch, but that the sea, mounting to the welkin's cheek, dashes the fire out. Oh, I have suffered with those that I saw suffer." So that tells us a lot about Miranda's character, an empathetic, sensitive character. A brave vessel who had no doubt some noble creature in her, dashed all to pieces. Oh, the cry did knock against my very heart. Poor souls, they perished. Had I been any god of power, I would have sunk the sea within the earth, or ere it should be good ship to have swallowed, and the frotting souls within her. And Prospero basically tells her to calm down. Be collected, no more amazement. Tell your piteous heart there's no harm done. And Miranda says, "Oh, woe the day! No harm. I have done nothing but in care of thee, my dear one, thee, my daughter, who art ignorant of what thou art, not knowing of whence I am, nor that I am more better than Prospero, master of a full poor cell, and thy no greater father." So everything I've done, calling the storm, has been for you. And you don't really know the reasons why, because you don't know who I am and you don't know who you really are. But she's about to find out. "More to know, did never meddle with my thoughts." He's saying, I have never really wanted to know. I've never kind of pried. But he says, "'Tis time I should inform thee farther. Lend thy hand and pluck my magic garment from me." So his cloak is a magic cloak, we're led to believe. Putting aside his cloak, "So, lie there, my art. Wipe thou mine eyes, have comfort." So my art. She has said at the start, if by thine art, in other words, by your magic, you have summoned this storm, whereas he is referring to her now as my art. "The direful spectacle of the rack, which touched the very virtue of compassion in thee, I have with such provision in mine art so safely ordered that there is no soul, no, not so much perdition as an hair, betid to any creature in the vessel, which thou heardst cry, which thou sawest sink. Sit down, for thou must now no farther." So he's promising her that no one was hurt by his magic. And they sit. "Miranda, you have often begun to tell me what I am, but stopped and left me to a bootless inquisition, concluding, stay, not yet." Bootless, meaning nothing came of it, pointless. Prospero, "The hour's now come. The very minute bids thee ope thine ear. Obey and be attentive. Canst thou remember a time when we came unto this cell? I do not think thou canst, for then thou wast not out 3 years old." So at only 3, she's too young to remember having arrived on the island. Miranda says, "Certainly, sir, I can." Prospero, "By what? By any other house or person? Of anything the image tell me that hath kept with thy remembrance." He doesn't understand how she could remember anything. "'Tis far off and rather like a dream than an assurance that my remembrance warrants. Had I not 4 or 5 women once that tended me?" So she feels like it's a bit like a dream or a memory, she's not sure. "Thou hadst a more, Miranda, but how is it that this lives in thy mind? What seest thou else in the dark, backward and abysm of time? If thou rememberest aught ere thou camest here, how thou camest here thou mayest." So if you can remember what happened before we came here, you might remember coming here. But she says, "But that I do not." And Prospero says, 12 years since, Miranda, 12 years since, thy father was the Duke of Milan and a prince of power. Sir, are you not my father?" So she's wondering, is she really the daughter of some duke? Thinking that he's implying that she had another father. But no, Prospero replies, "Thy mother was a piece of virtue, and she said thou wast my daughter. And thy father was Duke of Milan, and his only heir and princess no worse issued." So you are a princess, she's just found out. Obviously that's a bit of a shock. "Oh, the heavens, what foul play had we that came from thence? Or blessed was't we did. So what happened to us? What foul play? What schemes did we face? Or what was it that we did that we ended up here? Both, my girl. But foul play, as thou sayest, where we heaved thence and blessedly holp hither. So we were heaved hence, we were cast out onto the sea, but blessedly holp hither. So again, that's non-human agency. Some god or fate has brought them to this island and saved their lives. Oh, my heart bleeds to think of the teen that I have turned you to, which is from my remembrance. Please you, father. So she wants to hear more of this story. Prospero. My brother and thy uncle, called Antonio, I pray thee mark me, what a brother should be so perfidious. He whom next thyself of all the world I loved, and to him put the manage of my state, as at that time through all the signores it was the first, and Prospero the prime duke, being so reputed in dignity and for the liberal arts without parallel. Those being all my study, the government I cast upon my brother, and to my state grew stranger, being transported and wrapped in secret studies. Thy false uncle, dost thou attend me? So basically, he's been studying his arts and he's been really committed to study. And so he gave the government over to his brother, who basically then usurped him. Miranda answers that she is listening, sir, most heedfully. And you'll notice in this exchange how Prospero keeps asking for obedience and to be listened to. So that's sort of the nature of their father-daughter relationship. Father-daughter relationships, of course, being a preoccupation of Shakespeare's at this point in his life, very near the end of his life, possibly ruminating on his own relationship with Judith and with his other daughter, Susanna, of course. Prospero. Being once perfected how to grant suits, how to deny them, who to advance, and who to trash for overtopping, new created the creatures that were mine. I say, or changed him, or else new formed him, having both the key of officer and office, set all hearts in the state to what tune pleased his ear, and now he was the ivy which had hid my princely trunk, and sucked my verdure out on't. Thou attend'st not, you're not listening. Oh, good sir, I do. I pray thee mark me. I thus neglecting worldly ends, all dedicated to closeness and the bettering of my mind, with that which, but by being so retired, o'erprized all popular rate in my false brother, awaked an evil nature. So you see how Prospero is actually open to owning his own faults in what happened in Milan. He realizes that his studies basically caused him to lose the throne. He was too preoccupied. And here he's saying that he, opened temptation to his brother. And my trust, like a good parent, did beget of him a falsehood in its contrary as great as my trust was, which had indeed no limit, and confidence sans bound, sans of course meaning without, like sans in French. He being thus lorded, not only with what my revenue yielded, but what my power might else extract, like one who, having into truth by telling of it, made such a sinner of his memory to credit his own lie, he did believe he was indeed the Duke out of this substitution, and executing the outward face of royalty with all prerogative. Hence his ambition growing. Dost thou hear? So again, are you listening? But of course this tempest is going on out at sea. Miranda has never encountered other human beings apart from her father and Caliban. Suddenly there are people crying in the water, so it's no surprise she's not listening. But she says, your tale, sir, would cure deafness. It's such an important story and a striking story that you have to listen to it, you can't ignore it. Prospero says, to have no screen between this part he played and him he played it for, he needs will be absolute Milan. Me, poor man, my library was dukedom large enough. So he's saying that he wasn't really looking for power, he didn't want to rule, yet on the island he is absolutely in charge. Of temporal royalties, he thinks me now incapable, confederate, so dry he was for sway, with the king of Naples to give him annual tribute, do him homage, subject his coronet to his crown, and bend the dukedom yet unbowed. Alas, poor Milan, to most ignoble stooping. So it was the king of Naples kind of shoring up the dukedom of Antonio that really contributed to this situation. And Miranda says, oh, the heavens! Mark his condition and the event, then tell me if this might be a brother. Miranda replies, I should sin to think but nobly of my grandmother. Good wombs have borne bad sons. So This is Miranda really discovering her heritage and her father's heritage, which is actually a little bit of a shock to her. But we see several things about the characters of Miranda and Prospero here, just to summarise. We see that Miranda is tender-hearted, that she's a very sensitive soul. She feels deeply for the drowning people in the water, though it turns out that they haven't been harmed. And also, since she hasn't had any human interaction, apart from with Caliban and with her father, it shows that idea in plays of this era of nature over nurture. Her circumstances don't lead to her character. It is her noble birth that makes her like this. And she is that sensitive soul that a woman is meant to be in that era. She's part listening to her father, but of course there is a bit of a drama going on, an actual tempest out to sea. We can see some interesting things about Prospero as well. He has basically dedicated his life to learning and to magic, and he's lost his throne because of it. He acknowledges that, though. He acknowledges his fault, but he's still pretty angry with his brother and with Alonso, the King of Naples, and we can kind of understand this because he's ended up on this barren island. The fact that he's going to forgive them later is actually a kind of big deal. We can see him saying that he had no desire to rule or to be a leader, but that a library was enough for him. But as I said before, he's an absolute dictator on the island. He's absolutely in charge. He doles out justice. He makes the rules. He is the one that has to be obeyed. And we actually see him asking Miranda for obedience frequently throughout this scene. Are you listening? Listen to me. And at one point he actually says to her, obey. She is now really his only subject because Caliban is a slave. Now let's look at Act 2, Scene 2, and here's a little synopsis. Having escaped the apparently sinking ship, Trinculo finds Caliban hiding under a cloak, under which Trinculo also crawls to take shelter from the storm. Stefano, drunk, finds them both and shares his bottle with them. In return, Caliban abandons Prospero's service and swears to be Stefano's subject. So he swears allegiance basically to a drunk, but anything's better than Prospero, who has enslaved him and trapped him in a rock and makes him carry out menial tasks. Enter Caliban with a burden of wood and noise of thunder heard. Caliban says, all the infections that the sun sucks up, from bogs, fens, flats, on Prosper fall and make him by inchmeal a disease. His spirits hear me, and yet I needs must curse. His spirits hear me, meaning Ariel and the sprites. Also, look at the alliteration in the language here. The sun sucks up. Fens, flats. This is an articulate character, not the bestial character that Miranda and Prospero describe him as being. But they'll not pinch, fright me with urchin shows, pitch me in the mire, nor lead me like a firebrand in the dark out of my way, unless he bid him. So look at the terrible treatment he's having by the non-human servants of Prospero, being pinched and pitched in the mire and frightened. And, he really is being treated very badly. But for every trifle are they set upon me, sometimes like apes. So he's describing them as apes, and he himself has been described as bestial and animal-like and monstrous. That mow and chatter at me, and after bite me, then like hedgehogs, which lie tumbling in my barefoot way, and mount their pricks at my footfall. Sometime am I all wound with adders, who with cloven tongues do hiss me into madness. Now that's an interesting image. Adders, of course, snakes that you find in England. Cloven tongues. This is slightly reminiscent of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, the devil. And of course, Prospero refers to Caliban as a devil. Lo now, lo, here comes a spirit of his, and to torment me for bringing wood in slowly, I'll fall flat. Perchance he will not mind me. He lies down and covers himself with a cloak. But enter the very human Trinculo. Trinculo says, here's neither bush nor shrub to bear off any weather at all. There's nowhere to shelter from this storm. And another storm brewing. I hear it sing in the wind. Yon same black cloud, yon huge one looks like a foul bombard that would shed his liquor. If it should thunder as it did before, I know not where to hide my head. Yon some cloud cannot choose but fall by pailfuls, so bucketfuls of water are falling. It's a very extreme storm. Then he notices Caliban. What have we here, a man or a fish, dead or alive? A fish? He smells like a fish, a very ancient and fish-like smell, a kind of not of the newest poor John, a strange fish. Were I in England now, as once I was, and had but this fish painted, not a holiday fool there, but would give a piece of silver. A holiday fool, a performer at a feast. Were I in England, that's a meta-theatrical reference. It reminds the audience that they are in fact in England, even though the action is taking place on a remote island, and the European characters are all Italian. There would this monster make a man. So here is another colonial type thinking that Caliban is monstrous. He looks like a monster to them. Any strange beast there makes a man. When they will not be given a doit to relieve a lame beggar, they will lay out 10 to see a dead Indian. So they won't help someone who's disabled and begging with money, but they'll pay money to see a dead Indian. Basically, they like oddities and freak shows, basically. Not very nice, really. Legged like a man, and his fins like arms. Warm, O my truth, I do now let loose my opinion, hold it no longer. This is no fish, but an islander that have late suffered by a thunderbolt. And then there is a thunderbolt. Alas, the storm has come again. My best way is to creep under the gabardine. There is no other shelter hereabout. Misery acquaints a man with strange bedfellows. I will here shroud till the dregs of the storm are past. And by gabardine he meant Caliban's cloak, which he now crawls under with Caliban. They're so scared of the storm. Enter Stephano singing, and the fact he's singing does kind of imply that he's a bit drunk because they're in the midst of the most horrendous storm. And Stephano says, I shall no more to sea, here shall I die ashore. This is a very scurvy tune to sing at a man's funeral. Well, here's my comfort. And he drinks, and then he sings again. The master, the swabber, the boatswain and I, the gunner and his mate, loved Moll, Meg and Marian and Marjorie, but none of us cared for Kate. She had a tongue with a tang, would cry to a sailor, go hang. She loved not the savour of tar nor of pitch, yet a tailor might scratch her where'er she did itch. Then to sea, boys, and let her go hang. This is a scurvy tune too, but here's my comfort. So this is a very, very bawdy song that he's singing because he's clearly completely off his face, and he drinks again. And Caliban says, do not torment me, oh. And Stephano says, what's the matter? Have we devils here? Do you put tricks upon us with the savages and men of Ind? Ha! I have not scaped drowning to afeard now of your 4 legs, for it hath been said, a proper a man as ever went on 4 legs cannot make him give ground. And it shall be said so again while Stephano breathes at nostrils. So the fact that Caliban is on all 4s, it's kind of an image of subservience and how cowed that character has become because of the torments that he's had on the island. So, incidentally, savages and men of Ind, as in India, well, tales of the East Indies and far-flung exotic places would have been filling the royal court at the time. So this is referred to in what would have been a very popular entertainment in London when it was first performed. So Caliban says, the spirits torment me, oh, and Stephano says, this is some monster of the isle with 4 legs who have got, as I take it, an egg. So again, here is another European Italian type taking the native of the island, we don't know where this island is, Caliban, as being monstrous or less than human. Where the devil should he learn our language? I will give him some relief, if it be but for that. If I can recover him and keep him tame and get to Naples with him, he's a present for any emperor that ever trod on neat's leather. So he's like a freak for a freak show to be given as a present. Just give another human being as a present. It's another kind of slavery reference, really. Caliban says, do not torment me, prithee. I'll bring my wood home faster. He thinks he's being punished by sprites for being too slow with the wood. That's what he's imagining is happening here. But Stephano says, he's in his fit now and does not talk after the wisest. There's something wrong with him. He's having some kind of fit and he's talking rubbish. He shall have taste of my bottle. I'll give him some alcohol. If he have never drunk wine afore, it will go near to remove his fit. If I can recover him and keep him tame, I will not take too much for him. He shall pay for him that hath him, and that soundly. Caliban says, thou dost me yet but little hurt. Thou wilt anon, I know it by thy trembling. Now Prosper works upon thee. So he thinks that Stephano is working for Prospero and that he's about to get hurt. Stephano, of course, doesn't understand. Come on your ways, open your mouth. Here is that which will give language to you, cat. So drink this and you'll be able to speak. Open your mouth. This will shake your shaking. I can tell you, and that soundly. Caliban drinks. You cannot tell who's your friend. Open your chaps again so you can't tell that I'm actually trying to help you. Open your chaps again. Open wide your mouth, and he's going to pour the alcohol in. Trinculo says, I should know that voice. It should be, he is drowned and these are devils. Oh, defend me. So he believes that Stefano is dead, and this is like a demon pretending to be Stefano. Stefano says, 4 legs and 2 voices, a most delicate monster. His forward voice now is to speak well of his friend. His backward voice is to utter foul speeches and detract. If all the wine in my bottle will recover him, I will help his ache. Come. So he thinks that basically Trinculo and Caliban, who are under the same cloak, are like some kind of 2-headed beast because he's just so drunk. But the idea of a demon impersonating someone, as I mentioned before, King James was kind of into that kind of thing in his book Demonology. That was something that some people at the time believed to be possible. So Trinculo then realises it is in fact Stefano and says, Stefano! Stefano says, does thy other mouth call me? Mercy, mercy, this is a devil and no monster. I will leave him. I have no long spoon. So Stefano is really confused and drunk and a little bit scared, and Trinculo says, Stefano, if thou beest Stefano, touch me and speak to me, for I am Trinculo. Be not afeard, thy good friend Trinculo. If thou beest Trinculo, come forth. I'll pull thee by thy lesser legs. If any be Trinculo's legs, these are they. He pulls them out from under Caliban's cloak. Thou art very Trinculo indeed. It really is Trinculo. How canst thou be the siege of this moon calf? Can he vent Trinculos? And Trinculo says, I took him to be killed with a thunderstroke. But art thou not drowned, Stefano? I hope now thou art not drowned. Is the storm overblown? I hid me under the dead mooncalf's gabardine for fear of the storm. And art thou living, Stefano? Oh, Stefano, 2 Neapolitans escaped. So 2 Neapolitans have got off that ship and are still alive. So there's a lot of comedy in this scene between Trinculo and Stefano. The drink taken doesn't help matters much. But things are about to turn a little bit more serious. Caliban says to Trinculo, I prithee let me bring thee where crabs grow, and I with my long nails will dig thee pig nuts, show thee a jay's nest, and instruct thee how to snare the nimble marmoset. I'll bring thee to clustering filiberts, and sometimes I'll get thee young scammels from the rock. Wilt thou go with me? So he's offering his service, his servitude, to these new masters. Stefano says, I prithee now, lead the way without any more talking. Trinculo, the king, and all our company else being drowned, we will inherit here. So those of higher social standing, the king and the rest of the company, are dead. So we will inherit here. We will be the lords here. We will rule here. Here, bear my bottle. The Shakespearean term for hold my beer. Fellow Trinculo, we'll fill him by and by again. And Caliban is now also drunk. So he has been introduced to wine and has got off his face with Stefano and drunkenly sings, farewell, master, farewell, farewell. And Trinculo says, a howling monster, a drunken monster. But are not the Europeans drunken too? And also howling? Well, singing when they first entered. And Caliban sings, no more dams I'll make for fish, nor fetching, firing at, requiring, no scrape, treachery, no wash dish. Ban, ban, Caliban, has a new master, get a new man. No more am I going to do these stinking tasks that I've done before. I've got a new master now, and so get a new man. He's rebelling against Prospero. Freedom, high day, freedom, freedom, high day, freedom. But is it really freedom? And look how often freedom is repeated. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 freedoms. But then Stefano says, oh, brave monster, lead the way. And it's obvious that actually he just has a new master. Let's talk a little now about criticism of The Tempest. The Tempest, Critical History from York Notes, gives us a little view of attitudes to the play throughout the centuries. And it tells us Shakespeare's plays, like all drama, fell out of favour during the Cromwellian period. And just to explain that, That was what was known as the English Interregnum, or the Commonwealth, and that happened after the execution of Charles I when Cromwell took over. And Cromwell was very much a Puritan, and the Puritans felt that the theatre was immoral, and so theatres were closed during that period. And there is no record of any production of The Tempest for half a century. In 1667, John Dryden, the famous poet, and William Davenant adapted The Tempest for a post-Restoration audience. Their version, The Tempest, or The Enchanted Island, is a light-hearted comedy, lacking the depth and tragic elements of the original, because people wanted to have fun now that the theatres were open again. It was not until 1838 that the original version began to be regularly performed again, so a couple of centuries after its composition before it gets back into circulation. Davenant and Dryden appealed to audiences by concentrating on the problems and humour associated with sexual jealousy, although they introduced a note of political satire in the quarrels between Stephano and Trinculo. So a very different play to Shakespeare's. In the 19th century, some performances were romantic and others delighted in the technical advances of the contemporary stage, so it's all about the show. The Charles Keane production of 1857 is an example of the latter. It was said to involve 140 workers nightly to operate the elaborate machinery and create the stage effects favoured by early Victorian theatregoers. So the Victorian period is a period of advances in technology, and that's what people want to see when they go to the theatre. The New Shakespeare Society was founded in 1873, and under its influence, attempts were made to produce the play as Shakespeare intended. Directors broke away from much of the technical extravaganza and staged The Tempest as a realistic drama rather than as a romantic poem. There was, however, a tendency to concentrate on an idealised maturity that stressed the value of wise old age. So there's some Victorian values coming across there. Early 20th century critics such as Lytton Strachey tended to stress a cynical and disillusioned interpretation. They suggested that The Tempest failed to satisfy because it was the product of a jaded genius. In 1904, for example, in an essay entitled Shakespeare's Final Period, Strachey wrote that Shakespeare was bored with people, bored with real life, bored with drama, bored in fact with everything except poetry and poetical dreams. He is no longer interested, one often feels, in what happens or who says what, so long as he can find a place for a faultless lyric or a new unimagined rhythmical effect or a grand and mystic speech. So he felt that The Tempest was all about the language. In a more contemporary reading of the play, Jyotsna Singh, in post-colonial reading of The Tempest, available on the British Library, tells us that the long tradition of privileging Prospero's creative powers as beneficent and God-given began to be overshadowed by the growing stature of Caliban, following the decolonisation movements of the 1960s and 1970s in Africa, the Caribbean and Latin America. If traditionally Prospero's art represented the world of civility and learning, in contrast to the natural black magic of Caliban's mother, Sycorax, anti-colonial revisions of the play challenged this rather abstract Eurocentric division between art and nature. Instead, as Africans and Caribbeans saw that widespread national liberation was imminent, that is, from 1959 onwards, they began to revise and mobilise the play in defence of Caliban's right to the island on which he is born prior to Prospero's arrival. Caliban's assertion in the play, "This island's mine by Sycorax my mother, which thou takest from me," became the rallying cry for African and Caribbean intellectuals from the 1960s to the 1970s. Some productions of The Tempest you may want to check out. The Tempest from 2013, directed by Julie Taymor, interestingly starring Helen Mirren as Prospero, so a female Prospero, which puts a different slant on it, Felicity Jones and Jimon Hunsu. There's also the very famous Prospero's books, based on The Tempest from 1991, directed by Peter Greenaway, starring the legend John Gielgud, Michael Clarke and Isabel Pascoe. So once you have read and or seen The Tempest, what is your reaction to Caliban? How much is his behaviour impacted by Prospero and Miranda? What role does the non-human sprite Ariel play, and why do you think this character was needed? Do you think modern interpretations of the play as colonialist are merited? And how do the characters view the island itself, a place of exile, a prison, or a resource to be controlled and or plundered? Or any other thoughts that you might have?